for the inspirational speech. I'm now going to call on David to speak.
Thank you very much. I got very behind in making my notes for this meeting, and I left stuff on the printer which got posted to me a bit later. But anyway, I've got it here on my phone in various bits. I wanted to say that I approach these questions about the struggle for justice for the Palestinian people as an anti-Zionist Jewish socialist, as a trade unionist, and as an activist against racism and fascism since the mid-1970s. And like you, I was a long-haired student on the Grumwick picket line in the 70s.
I didn't see it.
But I've sort of, the two things that came out of that was I ended up in court, not for being arrested, but for witnessing somebody being arrested and being a witness in the court case. It was quite an interesting one, a real eye-opener, because it was the end of the morning, the picket had finished, there was an hour before our bus was going back to Leeds, and so me and a friend called Jeff, another student, we went towards a pub, and we saw somebody standing there. We had a lot of badges on, a young guy, we thought he must be on the picket, and he was calmly sort of saying that he wants to go in the pub. The landlady was outside the pub, and I don't know which pub it was, if any of you want to boycott it, but she was out there on the street saying, "I don't want any fucking Grumwick pickets in my pub." And he said, "Look, the picket's over in the morning. We just get a drink before we go back." And she repeated what she said. And the next thing we knew, a police van had drawn up. 2 police got out and hauled this guy off. But we were near enough to be able to see their numbers. And so we ended up as witnesses. And there were 2 other witnesses the other side, so there were 4 witnesses, we all had the same story, but it was contradicted in court. The 2 police who hauled him off were there, plus there was another policeman who said he saw it all, and he had his notebook with him. And he says the defendant was not just calmly remonstrating with the landlady of the pub, he was leading a group of 30 people down the road chanting, "Kill the fucking fascist police." And it was really Monty Python, but he was convicted of that. And the last thing the prosecution lawyer said was, "Should we now take some action against those witnesses who lied?" And it was extraordinary. So it's always good to be here and reminded of the Grumwick events. Yeah, nostalgia for it. But coming to this as an anti-Zionist Jewish socialist, it means that I'm serious about social justice, locally and globally. It means I'm serious about fighting all forms of racism, which includes anti-Semitism. It also includes racism in Israel towards Palestinians, towards black Jews, towards African refugees, and towards other non-Jews, now enshrined in the nation-state law. Over the last couple of years, the issue of Palestine, Israel, Zionism has become entangled in a very unhelpful way with issues around the Labour Party and allegations of anti-Semitism. And it needs untangling. If we're going to find some positive ways to go forward for the Palestinians, to go forward with progressive politics, and also for the fight against real anti-Semitism. Because I do think real anti-Semitism is growing in British society. Over the last 2 years, so many things have happened on this score. There's been many negatives, but also many positives, and there's a kind of close connection between them, which I think the other speakers have also hinted at. And the way I look at it, there's 4 things that I think are true. I think the situation of Palestinians on the ground has undoubtedly worsened, but the resistance has grown in that period. And we've seen that, and it's different kinds of resistance. We've seen that in Gaza with the return march, where people have paid a very, very heavy price. but it continues. And for all the stuff saying, well, it must be organised by Hamas, etc., this seems to be much more of a popular people's action against a protest about the Israeli state. We've seen it happening within Israel, with the Palestinian minority in Israel, which is, I think you said 20%. It's apparently it's about 22%, something like that now. It's growing, and I think Israel has only just woken up that it's a kind of time bomb for them, you know, because I think the role of the Palestinians within Israel is going to be increasingly significant. And during the protests that we've seen over the summer within Israel, we've seen Palestinian flags, not just at the Labour conference here, but on the streets of Tel Aviv. And there's been Palestinians marching together with Israeli Jews on the same protests. And huge numbers of people on those protests. And I think probably, my perception is that the resistance has been a little bit lower in the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank, but Ahed Tamimi as a symbol of resistance is really, you know, so many people are talking about her. There's been a very determined effort to stifle opposition to Israel and Zionism here by conflating that opposition to Israel with anti-Semitism. And there's been this attempt to force the Labour Party and other bodies to adopt a really badly worded, vague definition and an even worse set of examples that are largely to do with Israel and Zionism. And this has gone together with a highly personalised attack on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, led by the Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, as seen as pro-Palestinian and therefore anti-Semitic. The third thing I'd say that is, I think, true, is that anti-Semitism in Britain and elsewhere is growing, but it's not where the media are focusing. Yeah? The real centre of anti-Semitism today is actually in Central and Eastern Europe, in Poland, Ukraine, Hungary, and also in the USA, with the circle around Trump, who are kind of white supremacist Christian fundamentalists who are, you know, very, very strong Zionists, but actually don't like Jews very much, and they have this kind of Armageddon kind of idea. The Tory MEPs, you know, the Tory MEPs. Last week, the members of the European Parliament, the Tories, they lined up with the most far-right forces in the European Parliament to defend the Hungarian regime of Viktor Orban. And Viktor Orban he got re-elected this year by anti-Semitism was very central to his propaganda to get re-elected. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Roma, anti-refugee. It was all there, but his anti-Semitism was not just last year's anti-Semitism, it was 100 years ago, the protocols of the Elders of Zion type stuff. I'm 60 years old, and in the last 5 years, I've seen and heard more anti-Semitism than in the previous 55. But if you look at the media, they'll tell you it's all about people saying things about Israel. No, hardly any of those incidents have been to do with Israel. They've mainly been good old British anti-Semitism, old stereotypes, old prejudices, lots of Hitler stuff, lots of Holocaust denial stuff. That's the stuff that is actually around and growing. And the far right, who have got a bit of a kind of spring in their step at the moment, it's been decades since they held banners saying Hitler was right. But those kind of banners have appeared on our streets in the last couple of years. You know, there's no inhibitions about them. But the fourth thing I say, which I think is true, is that if you go to America, the fastest growing group among youngish American Jews is actually a group called Jewish Voice for Peace, which supports BDS. And they've been growing by thousands and thousands. Very interesting survey done in recent years with under 35s in America. The question being, If Israel didn't exist, would that be a personal disaster for you? Very large numbers saying no. Very large numbers. And the American Jewish public voted 70% against Trump when for the election that he was elected at. So how do we explain what's going on? There's a new confidence, I'd say, within the Palestinians within Israel as a direct result and reaction to the nation-state law. I know that it formalised what was already happening. For many years, there'd been the racism and the mistreatment of all kinds, including particularly the administrative detentions, imprisoning children and others. And this formalised it into a system of apartheid. That thing about saying self-determination within this country for only for the Jews. Arabic being downgraded. Arabic was always an official language in Israel, and now it has been downgraded to a language with a special status. Which is it's an appalling thing. The idea of a united Jerusalem as a capital for Israel only, and settlements as a national value. So this is land grabbing as a national value. But the reaction has been local and it's been global to this. I think we've seen some sometimes very simplistic explanations for the assault on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, seeing it as orchestrated by Israel. I think sometimes we attribute too much power to the Israeli government and the Israeli state. And it also sails uncomfortably close to conspiracy theories. I also think it's missing a very big part of the picture. Israeli lobbyists will do everything they can to influence governments, stifle and diminish Palestinian voices. But thank you. right, let's do that. Okay. But I think there's other groups who are using this as well for other purposes. The Tory party and pro-Tory press don't actually give a damn about Israelis or Palestinians. They're using this as a political football. Yeah? If the Tories really cared about any Jewish people in the world, they would not be getting into bed with the Hungarian government, with the Polish government, with the Ukrainian government, all of whom are full of anti-Semites. And even some of the groups in the Jewish community, like the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, they're very pro-Zionist, but they're using this issue mainly over domestic things, this one. The Zionist Federation is something different. The Friends of Israel organisations is different. They're much more just parroting whatever the Israeli embassy says. But groups like the ones who see themselves as leaders of the Jewish community, it's a right versus left issue over domestic policy. And at the end of the day, they actually care more about the threat of the Jeremy Corbyn government domestically than what is said about Israel. I want to finish with a couple of things. One is, I was going to say something about Margaret Hodge. There's a lot to be said about her.
Please don't.
Okay, one thing about her is she talks about, and I think it's a very pernicious thing, about opposition to Israel and Zionism slipping into anti-Semitism. As if it's like when you're on the pavement and you slip in over the curb into the road. There's an ocean between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And I think we've got to really sort of make that absolutely clear. Although there are occasionally some people who use anti-Semitic arguments to prop up pro-Palestinian positions, and we've got to police that and call that out. I want to finish with two quotes from the political tradition that I feel most comfortable in. And it's a tradition of a group called the Bund. And the Bund were Jewish socialists in Poland before the war, in the largest Jewish community of Europe. And they were the ones who got the most votes in the last municipal elections in 38 and 39, before the Nazis invaded. And they were an anti-Zionist, secular, socialist Jewish organisation. And most of them got wiped out during the Holocaust. But I want to finish with two quotes from survivors. One was a man called Emanuel Scherer, who was a Bundist, and he said, "Rights and justice for Jews everywhere, without wrongs and injustice to any other people anywhere." And I think you can see where he's pointing that. And the final quote is from Marek Edelman, who was the last surviving member of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising Command, who died in 2009. He stayed in Poland. He was persona non grata in Israel because he remained an anti-Zionist. And in the years before he died, he was making some very good links with Mustafa Barghouti, who he met through professional work. And then they found all sorts of things they had in common. And he said, to be a Jew means to be always with the oppressed, never with the oppressors. Thank you.